We're now joined by John Farmer, Jr., Director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University. My alma mater, not only Rutgers, but Eagleton. It's very hard to get into. I still have no idea how I got in, John, but that's another story.
One of our most prominent alums. So thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hey, let's do this. Let's talk about really important things. We're taping in the middle of March. It'll be seen later. I've said this to you before. The graphic will come up, democracy at a crossroads. We talked about 6 months ago, John. Is our system of democracy at greater risk than it was 6 months ago? And if so, why?
Well, I think our system writ large is. I mean, so we've had obviously the internal threats to democracy that we've talked about before that culminated in the riot at the Capitol on January 6th. And now we see what the real threat to democracy is. Ultimately, it's the use of brutal force, which we're now seeing in the Ukraine. So democracy is struggling on many fronts, both domestically and internationally. And I think we are at a crossroads.
John, again, because we're taping, excuse me, in the middle of March, we hope and pray for the people of Ukraine, but we do not know what's going to happen. And we're not doing war coverage. But there is a larger question. You connect the fight for democracy and the movement of Vladimir Putin and Russia, a non-small d democratic government, with our crisis to democracy. Why is that?
Well, because he illustrates what lies at the end of a failed attempt to govern democratically. Through history, democracies have been very fragile, and they've ultimately ended in totalitarian forms of government. And that's what we have to be conscious of constantly. And I think something we've lost sight of over the years, we've taken for granted that our system would just work on its own without our attending to it. And so we could be free to have our violent disagreements, and somehow everything would be fine. I think what we see in the world now, and it's really culminating right now in the Ukraine, but this movement toward authoritarian governments has been going on now for decades. And we have Russia, we have China, we have Hungary, we have even the government of Poland has sort of started tilting toward authoritarianism. And I think part of that is a reaction to the sort of the excesses maybe of freedom of expression that the social media has brought about. But we've really lost sight of the fact that we have to pay attention to the need to engage with each other and to compromise. And it's exasperating to compromise, but it's the essence of our system. Our system is set up so that if we don't compromise, it won't work. And so that's why I connect the two, because Putin is the logical endpoint of a failed experiment in democracy.
So, John, you're the former Attorney General in the state. You believe in and have lived by the rule of law for many, many years. There are a significant number of Americans who don't agree with what you're saying in this sense. They argue that, A, we make too much, particularly those of us in the media, academia, we make too much of January 6th. And it has absolutely nothing to do with what you're talking about, A, and B, it was a protest. And former President Trump has said really positive things about those who not just protested, but in fact rioted that day and assaulted the United States Capitol and put members of Congress at risk. And finally, not my opinion, many of them argued for Vice President at the time, Mike Pence, for horrible things that happened to him. Am I overstating this? Am I engaging in hyperbole, John Farmer?
No, I don't think so. I think anybody who tried to minimize the shock of what happened on January 6th either doesn't understand how our country is supposed to work or has other motivations that are nefarious to our future.
Hold on, John. Devil's advocate. They wanted to stop what they believed to be a fraudulent election, which the former president continues to state was a fraudulent election. 70 to 80% of the Republicans in this nation who are polled say the president, Joe Biden, is not really the president.
Yeah, well,
they're just protesting what they thought was a stolen election.
That's been a trending in our politics now for a couple of decades. You know, the challenge to the legitimacy of whoever's the president. You know, both parties have engaged in it, and it's got to stop, because it's, you know, the theory that somehow that election was stolen has been tested in literally dozens of court cases, on which I've been involved in, and nowhere has it been established. At some point, you have to come to grips with reality, and the reality is that the election wasn't stolen, that Joe Biden is our president. And, you know, what to say to people who disagree? They're not looking at the facts.
Yeah, but when I say devil's advocate, what I really mean is, what do we say to those who say, I don't care what you say, John Farmer. I don't care that you're Attorney General or that you're the head of the Eagleton Institute. I don't buy it. I believe it was stolen. So if people believe that, and if former President Trump, and it's not about President Trump, but he's the one saying this, and he has a lot of people following him. If people continue to believe in both parties, but disproportionately Republicans right now, that elections are not legitimate, what does that mean for our democracy?
It means we have a long way to go to sort of recover our civic values. We've reached a point now where people, because of the way that they're getting their news and the way that social media works, you know, where you have basically the commercial algorithms that drive it, that tend to drive polarization by basically reinforcing whatever proclivities people express. We're now at a place where you can have that kind of sort of almost pre-Civil War atmosphere where you can't talk to the other person.
Pre-Civil War?
In other words, prior to the Civil War, you had basically, it reached a point where the people in the North couldn't even talk to the people in the South. The narratives were so different. It's something that I studied extensively in law school, and it's remarkable how we've almost replicated that today, where people can't even reach common ground about what the facts are. So I think the process of recovering our civic values has to start with taking a really hard look at the media environment in which we live, in which there are very few outlets, you know, like frankly PBS, that do strive to be down the middle and to present both sides of things, and to force both sides to be in the same conversation. So what happens now is all you're hearing about the people we're hearing from, the people you agree with. When you encounter someone who doesn't agree with you, you almost have nothing to say to them. And that's, I think, what you're driving at with your devil's advocate point. Like, where do you start to that conversation? If they choose to believe that the election was stolen, how do you persuade them otherwise? Very difficult task.
I'm going to push this even further. I know there's a time issue, but I want to push this further. If people believe certain things, but then they go to news sources, information sources, social media sites, news organizations, whatever they are, that simply tell them that's right. Well, then what the heck are we supposed to do who have no horse? I say this all the time. People say, what do you mean you don't have a horse in the race? The only horse we have in the race is democracy. It's not about D's and R's, conservatives, Republicans. Then what is our job in all this?
Well, I think your job, the job of people who don't have a horse in the race, is to try to talk to both sides and try to persuade them that these differences they have, you know, can be overcome if there's a sincere effort to do it. But I think that what fundamentally has to happen, I think, Steve, is we have to take a look at regulating the public marketplace, the marketplace.
What does that mean, real quick? We've got the First Amendment. What does that mean, John? Freedom of speech, freedom of press. What does it mean to regulate the market?
It's not absolute. That's been established in court cases. I think the recent decisions by the Supreme Court equating spending with speech was a mistake. You have other free societies where speech is regulated, and what's clear about our Constitution, it was intended to be a pragmatic document, not some metaphysical treatise that you parse, like an astrophysicist or a high priest of some kind. The Constitution, as Justice Jackson said, is not a suicide pact, but the sort of absolutist rulings of the Supreme Court on some of these issues have set up a situation where it could become a suicide pact. If they've created a situation where spending is speech, and that social media can't be regulated. Political spending can't be regulated. Dark money prevails. They're creating an atmosphere of total chaos. And I think that needs to be looked at.
John Farmer, former Attorney General, Director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. Thank you, John, as always.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it, Steve.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. Stay with us.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, RWJ Barnabas Health, Operating Engineers, Local 825, IBEW Local 102, Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, Wells Fargo, the New Jersey Education Association, and by Suez North America. Promotional support provided by New Jersey Globe and by the New Jersey Business and Industry Association.
I'm very grateful that I'm still here.
That's me and my donor when we went to celebrate our first anniversary.
With a new kidney, I have strength.
They gave me a new lease on life.
I'm still going everywhere and exploring new places.
Nobody thought I was going to be here. Nobody.
And I look forward to getting older with my wife. That's possible now.
We're transforming lives through innovative kidney treatments, living donor programs, and world-renowned care at 2 of New Jersey's premier hospitals.
They gave me my normal life back. It's a blessing.
RWJ Barnabas Health. Let's be healthy together.